Let me take you on a journey to one of the most iconic rivers in the world, the Ganga. Known as the Ganges internationally, it's not just a river. For over a billion people, it's a lifeline, a sacred entity, and a source of survival. But how much do we truly know about it, beyond its spiritual aura? The Ganga began its journey high in the Himalayas at the Gangotri Glacier in Uttarakhand, India. At its source, it's called the Bhagirathi River, and its icy, crystal clear waters flow down from the glacier at nearly 4,000 meters above sea level. From the Bhagirathi, the river meets its sister, the Alkananda River, at Devprayag. It's here that it officially becomes the Ganga, beginning a journey of over 2,500 kilometers, cutting through the heart of India, nourishing its plains and touching countless lives. Along the way, the Ganga is joined by major tributaries like the Yamuna, the Gandak, and the Kosi, among others. These rivers bring snowmelt from the Himalayas and rainfall from distant regions, swelling its flow and ensuring it never truly runs dry, even in the scorching summer months. Eventually, the Ganga fans out into the Sundarban deltas, the largest river delta in the world, before emptying into the Bay of Bengal. This delta is not only a haven for wildlife, including the majestic Bengal tiger, but also acts as a natural shield against cyclones and rising sea levels. So, why is the Ganga so important? On a global scale, it stands out not just for its size, but for the incredible number of people it supports. More than 400 million lives depend directly on the Ganga for essentials like drinking water, irrigation, and transportation. It truly is the lifeline of the Indo-Gangetic Plains, which happens to be one of the most fertile regions in the world, by the way. Just imagine, this single river irrigates 45% of India's farmland, producing crops like wheat, rice, sugarcane, and so much, feeding millions in the process. But the Ganga isn't just about economics. It's also a spiritual river, revered in Hinduism as a symbol of purity and salvation. The ongoing Kumbh Mela, one of the largest religious gatherings in the world, is deeply tied to the sacred Ganga. Pilgrims from across the globe come to its banks, believing that a dip in the river during this time washes away sins and grants spiritual liberation. Cremation rituals performed on its ghats further cement its role in India's cultural identity. So, here we have a river that's both practical and spiritual, a dual identity, so to speak, that few rivers in the world can claim. But this very dual identity also makes it vulnerable. As we'll explore, the very people who revere the Ganga often harm it through pollution and overuse. And as India grows, so do the challenges the Ganga faces. Can it keep up with the demands of modern life while holding on to its sacred legacy? Before we dive deeper into the history, its challenges, and future of this almighty river, let's take a moment to appreciate what the Ganga represents. It's not just water flowing through land, it's a symbol of resilience, connection, and survival. To understand why the Ganga is more than just a river, we need to step back in time. Imagine ancient India where fertile lands and flowing rivers dictated the rise and fall of empires. It's here that the Ganga became the cradle of the Indian civilization. Thousands of years ago, the Ganga's basin, rich alluvial soil, made it a hub for agriculture and life. Empires like Magadha and Maurya thrived along its banks, with capitals like Pataliputra, which is now called Patna, becoming centers of power and culture. The Ganga wasn't just a source of water, it was a highway for commerce. Cities like Varanasi became bustling trade hubs with goods like silk and spices transported along its waters, connecting northern India to the Bay of Bengal. Even then, the Ganga was sacred. Pilgrimages to its banks weren't just religious acts, they connected people to their culture and their identity. Varanasi, for example, stood as both a trading hub and a spiritual center, as it is even today. The Ganga shaped civilizations, powered trade, and became a sacred thread uniting ancient India, a legacy that continues to flow even today. Beyond its spiritual allure, the Ganga plays a pivotal role in India's economy, infrastructure, and daily life. Let's explore how deeply embedded it is in the fabric of modern India. The Ganga Basin, also sometimes called the breadbasket of India, and for good reason, supports 45% of the nation's irrigated land. It is critical for India's food security, meaning self reliance on food. Over 600 million people depend on the crops grown in the fertile Indo-Gangetic plains, with states like Uttar Pradesh, Bihar, and West Bengal leading in the production of wheat, sugarcane, rice, and pulses. What makes this region so special is the basin's alluvial soil, which is replenished every year by the river's floodwaters. This natural cycle reduces reliance on artificial fertilizers in many areas, making farming more sustainable and a little more eco friendly. However, modern challenges like groundwater depletion and excessive water extraction threaten this agricultural hub, raising questions about its long term viability. The Ganga doesn't just power fields, it fuels factories too. Industrial hubs like Kanpur, Varanasi, and Kolkata depend heavily on the river for water and transportation. Take Kanpur, for example. It's famously known as the leather city of the world, with its leather and textile industries relying on the Ganga for raw hide processing. However, these industries also contribute significantly to the pollution of the Ganga, an issue we'll address later. Meanwhile, the river's hydropower projects, such as the Tehri Dam in Uttarakhand, generate significant electricity, while thermal power plants in Bihar and Uttar Pradesh depend on the river for cooling. And it's not just about energy, the Ganga supports 30% of India's inland fish production, including the famous Hilsa fish, a delicacy in West Bengal. Now let's talk about transportation. Did you know that Ganga is one of the longest navigable rivers in the world? Designated as National Highway 1, it stretches from Prayagraj to Haldia, covering an impressive 1620 kilometers. This waterway significantly reduces logistics costs for goods like coal, fertilizers, and food grains. Transporting cargo via waterways is 60 to 80% cheaper than it is by road. Efforts under the Jal Marg Vikas program are further modernizing this route with investments in terminals and dredging operations. In 2019 alone, India transported 4.5 million metric tons of cargo along this waterway, and this figure is set to grow with continued investment. The Ganga also fuels tourism and cultural economies. Cities like Varanasi, Haridwar, and Rishikesh see millions of visitors annually, driving local economies. Festivals like the Kumbh Mela are not only spiritual events but massive economic drivers. In fact, the Kumbh Mela has been valued at over $4 billion during a single event, creating temporary jobs and boosting supply chains. Beyond religious tourism, the Ganga's wildlife sanctuaries, such as the Sundarbans and the Rajaji National Park, attract ecotourists from around the globe, showcasing the river's role in sustaining biodiversity and livelihoods. Urban centers like Kolkata and Patna rely on Ganga for their water supply, sewage disposal, and industrial use. The river provides drinking water to over 50 million urban residents, with pipelines connecting its banks to homes and factories. However, the reliance has come at a cost. It fuels tourism and cultural economies. Over 3 billion liters of untreated sewage flow into the Ganga every day, reflecting the immense strain urbanization places on its vital resource. While cities contribute significantly to GDP, they also exacerbate pollution, raising the challenge of balancing development with sustainability. The Ganga's role in modern India is unmatched. It feeds the nation, powers its industries, connects its cities, and nurtures its cultural soul. But with this immense responsibility comes immense pressure. The river gives so much, yet it is being stretched to its limits. As India grows, the question we must ask is, how do we ensure the Ganga continues to thrive for generations to come? The Ganga has long been a symbol of life and prosperity, but as modern India expanded, so did the burden on this sacred river. Today, the Ganga, a river once celebrated for its purity, is grappling with pollution, ecological degradation, and a crisis of sustainability. Let's take a closer look at how this tragedy unfolded. The story of Ganga's pollution is deeply tied to the rapid urbanization and industrialization along its banks. As cities like Kanpur, Varanasi, and Kolkata expanded, so did the waste they generated. Industries, particularly leather tanneries in Kanpur, started discharging untreated effluents directly into the river. Toxic chemicals, including chromium, turned entire stretches of the Ganga uninhabitable for aquatic life. Industrial waste contributes 15 to 20% of the pollution in the river, with chemicals and dyes infiltrating the river's waters. Agricultural runoff laden with fertilizers and pesticides adds to the toxic cocktail, particularly in rural areas. The pollution has wreaked havoc on the Ganga's biodiversity. Once teeming with life, the river now struggles to sustain its aquatic species. The Ganga river dolphin, India's national aquatic animal, is now critically endangered with its population declining due to habitat loss and water contamination. Over the last 2 decades, fishing yields have dropped by nearly 40% in some stretches of the river. Fisher folk who once depended on the Ganga for their livelihoods are now struggling to make ends meet. Entire sections of the river have become dead zones where oxygen levels are so low that fish and other aquatic life simply cannot survive. For the millions of people who live along the Ganga, the consequences of this pollution are devastating. Around 12% of reported illnesses in the Ganga basin are linked to waterborne diseases like cholera, typhoid, and dysentery. In highly polluted stretches, nearly 1 in 4 households faces recurring illnesses due to contaminated water. Heavy metals like arsenic and lead found in the river's waters and sediment affect over 50 million people. Long-term exposure leads to severe health issues including cancer and developmental disorders. Along the riverbanks, the burning of waste, including plastics, releases toxic fumes, causing respiratory illnesses, especially in densely populated urban areas such as Kanpur, Kolkata, Haridwar, etc. As these cities grew, so did their dependence on the river, as I mentioned. But with this growth came an immense strain on its resources. Rapid urbanization has led to encroachment on the riverbanks, narrowing its flow and increasing the risk of flooding during monsoons. While deeply symbolic, practices like idol immersions and cremations contribute significantly to the pollution. Offerings such as flowers wrapped in plastic and partially burned bodies often end up in the river. Ironically, the industries and cities that rely on the Ganga for growth are the ones harming it the most. Industries along the Ganga contribute billions to India's GDP, yet their pollution is eroding the very resource they depend on. Even though cultural tourism is a major revenue generator, faces a paradox where the very rituals that attract pilgrims are also degrading the river. Festivals and religious gatherings often leave behind enormous amounts of waste which is not dealt with and is simply ending up in the river. The Ganga has given us so much, yet it is being stretched to its limits by the very progress it has enabled. Its waters sustain millions, but its health is in jeopardy. The question we must now face is this: how do we strike a balance between development and preservation? Because if we lose the Ganga, we lose far more than just a river. We lose a lifeline for millions of people and a symbol of India's enduring spirit. As we've seen, rapid expansion and pollution have taken a toll on this river. Now the question is, can we undo the damage? And what is being done to restore the health of the Ganga? Let's dive into the efforts being made and the challenges that still remain. The centerpiece of India's conservation efforts is the Namami Ganj program. Launched in 2014 with an initial budget of Rs 20,000 crores, which is approximately $2.7 billion, it's one of the largest river rejuvenation projects in the world, focusing on pollution control, biodiversity conservation, and sustainable development. Over 150 sewage treatment plants, or STPs, have been sanctioned under the program, with more than 80% operational, treating millions of liters of wastewater daily. For example, the Haridwar and Kanpur STPs have significantly reduced untreated sewage discharge, resulting in visible improvement in water clarity and quality in those areas. In cities like Rishikesh and Haridwar, the biological oxygen demand levels, a critical indicator of water pollution, have improved by 15 to 20% since the program's inception. Over 4,465 villages along the Ganga are now officially open defecation free, drastically reducing fecal contamination in the river. More than 13,000 hectares of land along the riverbanks have been reforested to prevent soil erosion and support biodiversity. Over 400 grossly polluting industries along the Ganga, including tanneries and dyeing units, are now being monitored in real time for compliance with environmental regulations. Did you know that the program employs over 8,000 Ganga Praharis? These volunteers are largely local residents who act as the river's guardians, monitoring pollution levels and spreading awareness in their communities. Despite these achievements, the challenges are significant. Over 3 billion liters of sewage is still untreated and still flows into the Ganga daily, overwhelming even the newly built infrastructure. Industrial non compliance remains a concern, with many factories discharging pollutants illegally. And then there's the sheer pressure of numbers. With over 400 million people living in the Ganga basin, the river's resources are just stretched to its limits. While the government does lead this charge, NGOs also play a critical role in filling the gaps, particularly in community engagement and ground level implementation. Organizations like the Ganga Action Parivar have mobilized volunteers to clean up riverbanks, remove thousands of tons of waste, including plastics and industrial debris. Campaigns to introduce biodegradable materials for religious offerings have gained traction in cities like Varanasi and Haridwar, reducing the influx of harmful pollutants such as plastic into the river. Efforts to protect endangered species such as the Ganga river dolphin have shown promise, with their population stabilizing in some stretches of the river. There are at present over 50 NGOs being actively managed in Ganga conservation, employing thousands of workers and volunteers. Their localized efforts complement the government's broader strategies, creating a more comprehensive approach to saving the river. Perhaps the most inspiring stories, however, come from the people who live along the Ganga. From grassroots movements to individual acts of conservation, these efforts are a testament to the power of a collective action. In Bihar, children have taken on the role of environmental ambassadors, educating their communities about the dangers of pollution and encouraging sustainable practices. In West Bengal, fishing communities collaborate with NGOs to monitor water quality and implement sustainable fishing practices, helping depleted fish populations in recovering. Rural communities in Uttarakhand also have planted thousands of trees along the riverbanks, creating natural buffers that prevent erosion and provide wildlife habitats. While these initiatives bring hope, they're not without challenges. For instance, stricter environmental regulations have led to the closure of many polluting industries, particularly leather tanneries in Kanpur, displacing thousands of workers. Every conservation effort comes with a little bit of a cost. As industries are forced to comply with stricter regulations or shut down altogether, economic consequences ripple through communities. The closure of illegal tanneries in Kanpur alone has displaced over 50,000 workers, many of whom lack alternative employment opportunities. While religious tourism brings billions annually, stricter waste management regulations during festivals have increased operational costs for businesses reliant on these events. The challenge lies in ensuring that conservation doesn't come at the cost of livelihoods. This is where programs like skill development and green jobs can play a transformative role. But sometimes it is important to take two steps back so you can go 10 steps forward. The efforts to save the Ganga are monumental, involving governments, NGOs, and local communities working together. Progress has been made, but so far we're far from the finish line. We must recognize that every drop of cleaner water, every tree planted, every law enforced, and every individual effort matters. Saving the Ganga isn't just about cleaning a river, it's about redefining how we coexist with nature in a rapidly developing world. It's about ensuring that future generations can inherit not only a river, but a legacy of sustainable growth, cultural richness, and environmental harmony. So, as we stand at this crossroads, the question remains: will we rise to the challenge, embrace collective responsibility, and turn the tide for the Ganga? Because when we save the Ganga, we save ourselves. Thank you for tuning into today's episode. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did enjoy it, make sure you like, share this video, and subscribe to my channel. Thank you so much for listening, and I will see you guys in the next one.